So, step two, now that we've got a page worth of the home timeline tweets shown up, shown up in a list, let's work on loading newer tweets in case anything new comes across. So what we want to do is add a header view to the list that'll sit at the top, and when the user clicks it, will load anything newer than what they're currently seeing so they can get updated to the latest. And the way that we'll do that is the way Twitter works for paging through tweets, at least, is that each tweet has a unique identifier, which will make sense to anybody who's worked on the server side stuff for any kind of site like this. And not only that, each identifier is sequential. So it's if you have a greater number for an ID of one tweet than another tweet, you know that the greater numbered tweet, the tweet with the ID that has the greater number came later than the one with the lesser number. So the way Twitter does its paging is that you can say, I want to get any new tweets before this or after that came after this particular ID, and all we need to do for our purposes is load through Twitter4j using a paging object and say we want new tweets later than this particular ID, and that ID will be the one at the top of the list. And then once we get those new tweets that come back, we'll just load a defaults page worth, which I think is around 20. So we're going to get 20 new tweets each time, 20 tweets the first time, or however many the page is, however big the page is. And then every time we load newer tweets, we could potentially get up to 20 newer tweets, and we'll just put those at the beginning of the array list that loads all of our tweets and tell the data, or tell the adapter to tell the list that its data has changed. So let's go through, look at the code that does that. Close all this down. So I'm going to I'm going to fold up this step 1 project and open up the step 2 project where we load newer tweets. And let's start from the beginning. And that would be in the status list activity. So let's look at, first of all, how we get the load more header view into place. So let's look at this in just a second. But what the header view is a load more list item. So that's all you need to know for now, which is just a view. But let's see how we get it in place, and then we'll look at some more particular stuff about that. So the first thing that we do is, you can see everything is the same. On resume, we're going to check if we're authorized. If not, load the home timeline. If we don't already have a list adapter, we'll load the home timeline down on line 48. And then loading the home timeline is done almost the same way. So now, instead of just setting the adapter, we also do a few other things. I'm doing this method, I'm calling this method called set load more views after I set up the adapter and before I set the list adapter to that adapter, which will actually put the data into the list. So let's look at what's in set load more views, which I believe is right down here below. On line 88. So I'm going to keep a reference to it as an instance variable for this activity because I want to know when it's clicked, and I'll show you that in just a second. But I'm going to set that reference to be the view that is inflated, cast into a load more list item out of a r.layout.loadMore. So you can see that I've used a different way of inflating views here. Instead of view.inflate, get layout inflator. Those are two different options that you have. I don't know if there's any really difference between them, but those are two different ways that you can inflate views, which again is turning the XML definition into a Java class that you can use. And then, so what I've done here is, since we're loading more and loading newer tweets and loading older tweets, I'm just going to reuse the same view and just tell it to display different text in different situations. So I've got a way to say show the header text for the header view in this case instead of show footer text, which we can look at here in just a second. Let's first look at the layout here. Well, actually, first let's look at line 91, which is the rest of this method. And this is how you set the header view. This is how you say there's a particular view that I want to show up at the top of the list, and it's different than a list item. You just say on a list activity, which let me jump up to the top here of the file. Status list activity extends list activity, which is which is an activity that knows how to control a list. So you get a reference to that list, and then you say just simply add header view and then put a view there. So that's how it gets to the top of the list. Let's look at what's inside of it. So I'm going to come over here to Resources, Layout, Load More. Let's look at the XML layout. And it pops into this visual layout editor, but I like the XML instead, so I'm going to change over down here at the bottom. So our view is a custom view of type Load More List Item, and it has a text view and it has a progress bar. The text view is going to be the header, and you can see that I set the text here to load more, but I change the text every time I set the header to either or set the item to show either a header view or the footer view. So that's not really important, but the text view shows up here. And then there's also a progress bar, which I've said a couple interesting things. We're not actually going to see this for a couple steps because of reasons that I'll make clear in a little bit. But this is basically a spinner. It kind of spins around and shows that there's something going on. The way you set it up to be that way is you say that it's indeterminate, and that will make it different than a progress bar that shows from like an increasing colored area that covers some sort of horizontal bar, which would be the determinate version, which means that we know like how many steps there are to complete in the progress. But since this is doing a network operation, we can't tell how long it's going to take. It needs to be an indeterminate progress bar, so it's just going to spin until it's done, showing that at least something's going on. So that's how the view is set up. Let's go look at Load More List Item to see how the class for that view is set up. That is inside com.o'reilly.android.otweet.layouts, Load More List Item. It's a relative layout, so that we can do some relative positioning if we want, but we're not actually doing that because there's only two components on there, the header text inside the text view and the progress bar, and the progress bar is invisible. I guess it is laid out to left, so it doesn't sit over the top. So we are doing a little bit of relative layout there. But then back in the view class, we just have a reference to the load more text and the progress indicator. And here I did the right thing. I guess I just must have gotten lazy when I wrote that other code. On finish inflate, I'm finding views. Finding views is down here on line 44 to 48. We just get a reference through find view by ID for each one of those components. And then here's a couple utility methods. First of all, show header text is one that we've already called. We just get a string resource here for the string for load more header, and then set the load more text to that header, and then footer we just get the string for load more footer. So if I open up the strings file for step 2, you can see if I switch over to the XML view that I've got load more footer and load more header defined as strings here in the strings.xml, which shows load newer tweets or load older tweets, which you've already seen on the view. So that's pretty straightforward. And then I also have a method called show progress and one called hide progress, which basically hides or shows the progress indicator. So that way I can tell it to start showing progress when the user taps it. So that's it for the view. And then I've added that as a footer or as a header view here. Now let's talk about what happens when it actually gets clicked. So you'll remember from last time that we have a method on list activity called onListItemClicked, which will be called when any of the views for each item in a list view is clicked. And in this case, and by the way, that'll be called for the headers or footers as well. So all we need to do is just check to see if whichever one got clicked was the header view, because all we're doing is loading newer tweets at this point. We'll say if the view equals header view, then we want to show header view progress and then load newer tweets. So let's go look at load newer tweets, which is right here on line 77. Load newer tweets, header view, hide progress. Why do I hide progress? I guess because this is going to be loaded synchronously right here. Might as well. Anyway, I think the later code will be doing this correctly. We'll only hide progress once everything is done. But loading newer tweets, here's where that paging object comes into view. So we're going to say Twitter get home timeline, but instead of just getting the home timeline with no qualifications, we're going to set up a new paging object here, which then uses like a builder pattern. And we say we want a page since the ID, we want whatever the default page size is, since the ID of the first ID on the adapter. So we'll delegate that after the adapter, and the adapter should be able to tell us what the ID of the first item in the list is. And then once the adapter is loaded, or once those statuses are loaded, then we tell the adapter to load those new statuses as newer tweets, which will basically append them to the beginning of the list. And then you'll see that on line 82 and actually on line 63, when I load the home timeline, in both of those cases I get a reference to the list view and say set the selection to 1, and the list view is a zero-based list, so that basically sets the view right below the header view as the top view in the list. That way it sort of hides that header view and it's not always hanging around. Let me go through one more bit of code and then you'll actually see how that works. So let's go to the adapter get first ID and just check out how we're getting the most recent ID. So I'll hover over this and hit F3, and then you can see this method that I added to the status list adapter get first ID just loads the first status by getting the item at 0, and if it's null, we'll just make one up. Otherwise, it'll get the ID of that guy. So that's just how you deal with paging on Twitter. And then append newer is a new method also. So here's something interesting. When I think during the last class, whether we extended list adapter or base adapter, I can't remember which, but we had to when we added new items to our task list. Remember when we added items to the adapter, we needed to at the end say that the data set had changed. We say notify dataset changed, and that will have the adapter update any views that are listening to it and tell them that they need to display new data. But what's interesting is there's an insert method in ArrayList adapter or array adapter that will let you put things into it's the collection that holds the data for that list. But each time that you insert something or in any way change that data or change the order of the data in the collection or put new things in or take things out, it's going to notify the list that something's updated. So since we're loading a whole array list of new statuses, or stat-i if you want, we don't want it to notify the list and have it update every time a new one is inserted. So what we can do is sort of shut those notifications off for a little bit. We say set notify on change to false, and then every time we insert one of these new ones at the top of the list, it's not going to notify the list that something has changed. And then at the end, we can say set notify dataset changed, and that will actually turn those notifications back on. So every time something's changed about the array list that this array adapter holds, it will make new notifications again to the view and tell it to reload its view. So again, we're just shutting those automatic notifications off, inserting all the new statuses that we loaded in the new page, and then notifying that the data set has changed. So let's look at that actually running. Step 2, I need to go over here and run this as an Android application. Now the new code should be getting deployed. And once the home timeline is loaded here into the list, you can see that there's no header view showing up. This list item is the first one that shows up. And that's because, again, back here in status list activity, when I load the home timeline, the last thing I do after I set the adapter is set the selection to 1. And that's kind of a nice user experience. I'm sure you've seen it on other Twitter applications because you don't get bothered with that header view when you don't want to see it. But if you try to scroll up to see new tweets, instead of seeing newer tweets, you're shown that you're at the top of the list already, and you see the header view that allows you to load newer tweets. So that's just an easy way that you can do a little bit of cleanup on the view. Alright, so let's click this and see what happens. You can see that it just kind of jumps to the list at the last place we already had one loaded, so that means that nothing new is in the home view or the home Twitter timeline for this user. So I think I can go create one here. If I go to Twitter, you can see this actually working. I'm signed in as OTweetAndroid, which is the user that I'm using for this class. You can see here's my timeline right now, and this retweet of Chris Pirillo, I guess, by Creative Live is the one that's showing up at the top. Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good. Again, this is live, so we're seeing anything and everything that shows up on Twitter. But if I tweet something new, like learning about header views in Android lists, and tweet that, now I've got a new tweet in my home timeline that I created. And if I switch back to the emulator and scroll down for load newer tweets, click load newer tweets, now that tweet is at the top of the list, and we've selected that one, and the header is again sitting at the top. So that's how that should work. Let's see if we've accomplished everything that we need for this step. So we've gotten the latest ID. We load the home timeline with the paging object to get any new tweets that have shown up since the first tweet in the list's ID, and I think we're all set. So in summary, a list view can have a set of headers. So that's another interesting point. You can have as many different headers as you want. We only have one, but you can have multiple headers. And then footers, we're going to be looking at those in the next step. And those are list items that can display special data, metadata controls, load new, paging type controls, just like we've got here, that kind of thing.
Let's start with a question from the audience. We have one from Ernest.
Hi. I had a question in the loadmore.xml. It looks like some of the pixel definitions had changed. I think one of them was DPI and another one was SP, and I was just wondering why you went with those as opposed to just PX or something.
Okay, we're going to go over that in depth in 2 classes, but I'll give you the quick answer right now. You want to use SP for text, and you want to use DP for graphics. The reason is that SP stands for scaled pixels, and that takes into account not only screen size and density, but the user's preference for text size, so they can go bump that text size up, and this will honor that as well as those other things. And then DP, dependency independent pixels, will take care of different screen sizes and deviations from the standard pixel density, which I think is 160 pixels per inch. But if that doesn't make sense to anybody else, hopefully that answers your question. But if it doesn't make sense, we're going to be going over that in depth in 2 classes.
And then I had one other question. When you're showing the load more option on the list view, is it at all possible to have the timeline auto refresh without having to click it first?
Yeah, sure. You could do that. Let me think how you would actually do that, though. So you'd probably want to do... You can't just like surprise the user by when this view shows up, and I'm not even really sure how you do that technically. We'd have to experiment a little bit. Like we don't want to just show it when the view shows up. Is anybody familiar with Tweety, or I guess now the official Twitter app for the iPhone, called Twitter now, or Twitter for iPhone?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so what that app does, which I really like, is it allows you, as you pull down, it kind of shows you that, hey, if you keep pulling this list, then let go at a certain point. Once this view is completely shown, then we'll load new tweets. But the problem is that there's not as much of a physics model, I guess, for the Android list as there is for the iPhone one. So there's not really that stretchy rubber band type of a behavior. So I don't know if that would quite work. But you could do something where this header view is really tall and then show the user as more of it is revealed. I'm not sure again of the technical details, but you can show them that if they keep on pulling down and then let go at a certain point, it'll load new tweets. You could do something like that. I don't think you'd want to do it automatically, though.
Cool. Thank you. And I have one question that I'm going to hand it off to Sarah and Ruth. Somebody's asking to explain the Android intermediate attribute.
Oh, for the progress bar?
Yes.
You know what? Well, let me just give a quick rundown, and then we're going to see. Well, I'm going to make this point again in even more detail in the next segment. But when I click this, remember that I'm calling show progress on this header. But when I click it, nothing happens because you don't see progress. The reason is that we're blocking the UI from updating by doing the work on the UI thread. So you don't actually see the progress indicator show up. But later on we will, and then it'll probably make more sense. But just really quickly load more. This progress indicator, this progress bar, we're setting indeterminate to true because we want it. We don't know how to know how much progress is completed. So it's just going to turn that into a spinner, a little guy that spins in a circle.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't realize before you were actually on the UI thread, but yeah, that makes sense.
So is the correction that it's indeterminate, Android indeterminate and not intermediate?
I think so.
Oh, I didn't even catch you said that.
Yeah.
I guess I knew. I translated in my head.
Yes,
Good,
you did.
good job.
Yeah, it's
Excellent.
not intermediate. It's indeterminate.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Weird.
I have a question or two here from GoToWebinar. What happens with set selection 1 when there are no tweets yet?
Set selection 1 when there are no tweets yet. Good question. I don't know. It may blow up. It's a good question.
Okay. And earlier you said you prefer to edit the XML rather than use the layout editor, and this is what that person has been hearing all along. Is it true that the layout editor is too buggy and that we need to view edit XML to maintain real control over code?
I've found that to be the case. Yes. So I mean, like, look at this. Load more in the view, the visual editor. I can't even see what I have out there on the screen. I think the problem in this case is that I've got a custom class here, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I just never use it. It's a lot easier to. Not only is it's still not quite complete, I guess. It doesn't know how to deal with a lot of skinning changes. So if I've got some like programmatic skinning going on, it completely freaks out, doesn't know what to do. So I don't know. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the case.
Okay, Tony, I have a couple from the chat room. Number one, so for the indeterminate, which loads the default spinner, is there a way to load your own spinner? A custom spinner?
Well, yeah, you wouldn't load your own spinner. You would just style the spinner the way that you wanted it to look instead.
Okay. And then I have another question. It says, so notify dataset change calls set notify on change equals to true. Does it?
Yes, it does.
Does it activate it temporarily?
No, it turns it back on. So let's look back at the adapter. In fact, I think we can look at the documentation for this. So I'm going to hover over this, hit F2, and that will show the Java doc for that method. Well, let me zoom in, but I guess it doesn't say. Notifies the attached view that the underlying data has been changed and it should refresh itself. I don't know where I read I can't remember, but it's in some documentation somewhere that I read that when I set notify on change to false and then call notify dataset change, it turns it back on. Let's take that to the forums, but I think I read that somewhere.